If the future already exists, then what is it that truly passes through us each day? Does time actually move forward, or does it stand still, like a silent mirror reflecting the changing states of the human mind? This video does not tell a science fiction story. It goes straight to a feeling everyone has experienced. Leave a comment and tell me this. Do you believe time is running, or are you the one who is changing? And to understand that, we must begin somewhere very close. When time does not change, only our perception does. Have you ever noticed how an hour can vanish like a breath when you are laughing with someone you love, yet a single minute can feel heavy, slow, almost insolent when you are waiting for bad news, or staring at a clock that refuses to cooperate? That simple, everyday contrast is more than a quirky mood. It is a clue. Because if time were truly a river flowing at one fixed speed, why would it sometimes feel like a waterfall and other times like thick honey? We live with a strange double vision. On the one hand, the world runs by schedules, calendars, deadlines. On the other hand, your inner world keeps a different kind of time, a private astronomy where some moments burn bright and short like meteors, and others stretch long and pale like winter dusk. And this is where the real question begins to glow. Perhaps the passage of time is not a thing out there, moving past you like scenery outside a train window. Perhaps the feeling of time passing is something your mind creates, moment by moment, like a projector casting motion onto still frames. Long before we ever argued about quantum mysteries or cosmic horizons, your own living body has been conducting an experiment. Every day, every hour, every heartbeat. And the results keep whispering the same unsettling possibility. Maybe what changes is not time itself, but the state of the observer. Physicists have a way of speaking that can sound cold at first, but listen closely and you'll hear the poetry hiding inside the equations. Einstein once wrote, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." In that single sentence, a trapdoor opens beneath our ordinary assumptions. If the boundaries we feel so strongly are, in some sense, an illusion, then what exactly are we experiencing when we say, time passes? Carlo Rovelli, a physicist who writes about time with a kind of quiet reverence, has said, "Time is not what it seems." And that is the perfect phrase for this moment, because your own experience already agrees with it. Time does not seem the same when you are relaxed as when you are afraid. It does not seem the same when you are absorbed as when you are bored. It does not seem the same when you are in love as when you are lonely. So we start to suspect something important. The mind is not merely riding on top of time like a passenger. The mind may be shaping time as it lives through it. Think about how the brain actually handles reality. It does not record the world like a camera. It edits, it predicts, it compresses, it fills gaps, it highlights what matters, and it blurs what does not. Your sense of now is not a raw measurement. It is a constructed feeling, assembled from attention, memory, emotion, and expectation. When you are joyful or deeply engaged, your attention becomes wide and fluid. You stop checking the clock. The mind stops carving the moment into small, counted pieces. The experience becomes a single, seamless fabric, and because you are not measuring it, it feels short. But when you are waiting, attention becomes narrow and sharp, like a needle. You become painfully aware of every missing second. The mind keeps asking, "Is it here yet? Is it here yet? Is it here yet?" And each repetition is like a tap that counts the emptiness. You are not merely passing time. You are watching yourself pass time, And that extra layer of self-awareness can make a minute expand into something almost physical. Here is a simple example that almost everyone recognizes. Imagine you are heating water for tea. If you set the kettle on and then scroll your phone, distracted, half present, the water boils, and you barely notice the interval. It feels like it happened quickly. But if you are very tired or anxious, and you stand there staring at the kettle, listening for the first tremble of bubbles, watching the surface as if your gaze alone could force it to change, the same 2 or 3 minutes can feel absurdly long. The clock on the wall does not change its pace. The physics of boiling does not slow down. What changes is the density of your awareness. Your mind is adding frames to the experience by checking it again and again, and those frames become the felt length of time. Now consider a second example, more human, more tender. Think of a long drive you took with someone you care about, the kind where conversation flows without effort. The miles disappear. Hours pass without wait. Then compare it to the experience of sitting in a waiting room before a medical appointment, where every sound is too loud, every cough feels like a warning, and the air itself seems to thicken. In both cases, the same hour contains the same number of seconds, yet 1 hour feels like a feather, the other like a stone. The difference is not in the external measurement. The difference is in the emotional gravity of the moment. Fear, uncertainty, and anticipation pull attention inward. They make the present feel crowded, tight, over-detailed. Joy and absorption let attention relax outward. They allow the present to feel spacious. And paradoxically, that spaciousness can make it seem brief when you look back. And this is where the story becomes quietly cosmic, because the universe itself seems to agree that time is not a single universal metronome. In relativity, time is not a master clock ticking identically for everyone. It is braided with space, shaped by speed and gravity. Clocks in different conditions do not agree. That's not philosophy. That's measurement. That's reality. But what fascinates me is how your own inner experience seems to echo this. The universe tells us that time can stretch and compress under gravity. Your mind tells you that time can stretch and compress under emotion. Two very different languages, pointing to a similar truth. Time is not simply out there. Time is relational. Time is contextual. Time is, in some deep way, tied to the observer. So let's come back to the gentlest experiment of all. If you close your eyes right now, can you truly feel time moving? Not think about it. Not infer it from memory or from the expectation of the next moment. Can you actually feel the passage itself? The way you can feel wind on your skin or the weight of a blanket? Most people discover something surprising when they try. With eyes closed, with the room quiet, time does not present itself as a thing. What you notice instead is change. A breath beginning and ending. A sound in the distance. A thought arriving like a small comet and fading. A subtle shift of sensation in the body. What you perceive directly is not time. What you perceive is a sequence of changes, and your mind strings those changes together into the story of motion. In that sense, time may be less like a river and more like a name we give to the ordering of experience, not a substance, but a pattern. And once you see that, a new question slips into the room, almost mischievous in its calm. If time is the ordering of experience, then what happens when experience changes its style? When attention becomes still, does time lose its grip? This is one reason meditation can feel so profound and so simple at the same time. When you stop constantly narrating, when you stop anticipating, when you stop rehearsing the past and bargaining with the future, something curious occurs. The present becomes less like a moving point and more like a wide field. Not endless, not mystical in the cheap sense, but quietly open. And in that openness, the feeling of time going somewhere can soften. You may still hear the clock, but it no longer feels like a whip. It becomes just another sound in the room, like rain or distant traffic. The mind, when it rests, stops clutching at the next moment. It stops demanding proof that it is progressing. And in that state, it becomes easier to imagine what certain physicists and philosophers have dared to suggest, that the flow of time may not be a fundamental feature of reality, but a feature of how we, as conscious creatures, experience reality. This is not about stripping life of meaning. In fact, it does the opposite. If your sense of time is shaped by attention, then attention becomes sacred. Where you place your attention changes the felt length of your life. Not the number of years on paper, but the lived texture of those years. This is why childhood summers seem endless in memory. The world is new, attention is hungry, everything is vivid, and the mind records more detail. Later, when life becomes routine, attention narrows, days blur, and months can vanish like smoke. The calendar says time is steady. The soul says time is elastic, and both are telling the truth, each in their own domain. Now, if we let this idea breathe a little deeper, it offers a strangely comforting possibility. When you suffer, when you wait, when your mind is trapped in anticipation, it can feel like time is punishing you, like it is dragging you across rough ground. But if the heaviness is partly a function of attention and emotion, then there is a gentle lever you can pull, not to deny pain, not to force happiness, but to change your relationship with the moment, to widen the lens, to return to the body, to notice the breath, to remember that the clock is not your enemy. The clock is just a tool. The feeling is the thing that swells and shrinks. And feelings can be met with care. The most haunting part is that this does not make the universe smaller, it makes it more intimate. Because now the big questions of physics are not sealed off in distant laboratories and space telescopes. They are sitting with you in the quietest moments of your day. When you are waiting at a red light, when you are watching steam rise from a cup, when you are lying in bed at night and the mind starts counting tomorrow. In those moments, you are not just a person with thoughts. You are an observer, and the nature of time is wrapped around observation like a cloak. So let's end where we began, but with a clearer sense of the mystery. You feel time race when you are happy and crawl when you are waiting. That is not a mistake in you. That may be the signature of how reality is encountered by a conscious mind. The universe may contain time as a dimension, a structure, a relationship between events. But the passage, the flowing sensation, the impression of a moving now might be something else entirely. A story your brain tells to stitch the world into meaning. A lantern your awareness carries as it moves across a landscape of change. And here is the question I want to leave hanging in the air, like a star you cannot stop looking at. If time itself does not truly flow, if the future in some sense already exists, if the past is not gone the way we imagine, then what are you, in this moment, really moving through? Are you traveling across time like a pilgrim? Or are you awakening to different rooms in a house that was always there? Have you ever wondered where the moment we call now actually is? Not in a poetic way, but in a literal way. Because the instant you try to hold it, it's already gone, and the mind is left with a strange aftertaste, like trying to catch mist with your hands. If the present is always now, Does it truly travel from past to future? Or is that movement something we add, something we paint onto reality the way we paint constellations onto scattered stars? There is a quiet reason this question matters. It isn't just philosophy for people who enjoy late-night conversations. It touches the simplest, most human experience we have, the feeling of becoming. We wake up, we age, we remember, we anticipate, and we call that river time. But sometimes, especially in still moments, you can feel the possibility that the river is not out there. The river might be inside. The passing might be something the brain produces, the way it produces color from wavelengths, or music from vibration. As Albert Einstein once wrote in a private letter after the death of a friend, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. It's an unsettling sentence, because it suggests that what we call now is not the edge of a moving blade, slicing reality into was and will be, but rather a spotlight moving across a stage that is already built. And yet, when you look up into the night sky, the universe seems to encourage this doubt. Every star you see is a message from the past. Some of those photons have traveled for decades, centuries, thousands of years before touching your eyes. If you look at a galaxy millions of light years away, you are not seeing it as it is now. You are seeing it as it was when those photons began their long voyage. The cosmos does not deliver a synchronized present. It delivers layered history, stacked like transparent sheets. And in that stacked reality, the question becomes sharper. If we never directly access the universe's now, why are we so convinced it exists as a universal thing at all? The physicist Carlo Rovelli has a way of stripping this idea down to its bones. He writes, "The idea of a universal present is an illusion. That is not a mystical claim, and it's not a romantic metaphor. It's a sober statement arising from modern physics, from the fact that simultaneity depends on motion and gravity. Two people moving differently or standing in different gravitational fields will not agree on what events are happening at the same time. In other words, now is not stamped into the universe like a fixed watermark. It is stitched together locally from where you stand, how you move, how your body sits in the gravitational curvature of Earth, the Sun, the galaxy. But even if physics loosens the nails holding now to the wall, our inner experience still insists that time flows. It feels undeniable. You can almost hear it in your chest, like a second heartbeat. So we need to be honest. The sensation is real, even if the thing it points to might not be. That's why the most useful approach is not to argue with the feeling, but to examine it gently, like a scientist holding a fragile artifact, careful not to break it with certainty. Consider a simple example. Think about a time you waited for important news, perhaps a phone call, a medical result, a message from someone you love. Minutes stretched. Your attention became a tight knot. You checked the clock, then checked it again, and every glance seemed to confirm that time was crawling. Now contrast that with an evening when you were absorbed, truly absorbed, in a good conversation, a song, a grandchild's laughter, a film that carried you away. Hours disappeared. The clock did not change its behavior, but your experience of time transformed completely. This is not a small detail. It's a clue. It hints that time passing might be less like a conveyor belt moving beneath reality and more like a candlelight flickering across memory and anticipation. Here's another example, even more intimate. Recall the drive home along a familiar route. You arrive and suddenly realize you barely remember the last 10 minutes. The turns happened, the lights changed, your hands guided the wheel, but your conscious mind was elsewhere. Did time pass differently? Or did your brain simply record fewer markers, leaving you with a thinner ribbon of memory to measure the journey against? Many of our judgments about time rely on memory density. When more distinct moments are stored, time feels longer in retrospect. When fewer are stored, it feels shorter. The passage may be inseparable from how the mind lays down its footprints. This leads us to a provocative possibility. Perhaps we are not moving through time like travelers along a road. Perhaps time is the road our mind draws after we have already walked. In that view, now is not a location in the universe. It is a process in the brain's method for taking a vast, simultaneous world and turning it into a story we can live inside. And stories require order. A narrative needs before and after, cause and effect, build-up and release. The brain is an extraordinary storyteller. It takes raw sensation and arranges it into a coherent experience. It filters, prioritizes, connects, and labels. It makes a continuous self out of billions of neural events. It makes a stable world out of shifting inputs. So it is not outrageous to wonder whether it also makes the sense of a moving present, a now that seems to slide forward, carrying you with it. At this point, some people worry that this idea steals meaning from life. If the future already exists, do choices matter? If now is a mental construction, is anything real? But notice what those fears assume. They assume that meaning requires a cosmic clock in the background. Yet meaning might be closer to music than to machinery. A melody is not less meaningful because the notes could be written on a page all at once. You still experience it in sequence. You still feel tension and resolution. Your heart still responds. The page does not rob the song of its power. It simply reveals that the song's wholeness and the listener's experience can both be true at once. In a similar way, the idea that we are experiencing slices of something that may already exist does not automatically diminish the value of the slice. If anything, it can deepen it. It invites us to treat the present as a sacred lens, not a vanishing scrap. It invites us to pay attention, because attention is what makes now luminous. Without attention, the moment becomes a blur, a skipped frame. With attention, it becomes vivid, textured, almost spacious. This is where the language of contemplation quietly meets the language of cosmology. In meditation, people often report that time softens. The usual pressure of next relaxes. Thoughts about past and future still appear, but they lose their grip, like clouds drifting across a wide sky. The now becomes less of a knife edge and more of an open field. The body is still here. The world is still here. But the sense of being dragged forward eases, and something else becomes noticeable. Awareness itself, steady beneath the changing content. If you've ever sat in silence and listened closely, really listened to the sound of a fan, the distant traffic, your own breath, you may have touched this. The clock still ticks, but the mind stops measuring. And when measurement pauses, the feeling of time passing can fade. That doesn't prove time is an illusion, but it reveals something important. The passage of time is not merely a feature of the external world. It is intimately tied to the mind's habit of dividing experience into before and after, then comparing and narrating. So when we ask, "Where is now?" we are also asking, what is the mind doing when it creates a present? We are asking whether now is a universal coordinate or a living phenomenon generated at the meeting point of brain, body, and cosmos. We are asking whether the universe contains time like a river, or whether time is how a conscious being navigates a universe that may be far stranger than our instincts suggest. And perhaps the most honest answer is not a crisp conclusion, but a shift in how we hold the question. We can admit that physics challenges the idea of a single moving present. We can admit that our perception of time is flexible, shaped by attention, emotion, and memory. We can admit that the night sky itself is a museum of layered nows, each arriving late, each telling us that reality is not delivered in a single synchronized package. Then, in that gentle uncertainty, something opens. Not nihilism, not confusion, but wonder. Because if now is not a place the universe gives us, but a place we create through awareness, then every moment becomes an act of participation. The present is not merely found, it is formed. The universe does not just happen to us. In some subtle way, we are part of how it becomes experienced. So let me return to the first question, but let it land more quietly this time. Have you ever wondered where now is? Maybe it is not a point marching forward on a timeline. Maybe it is the mind's lantern, illuminating one portion of a vast landscape that might already be there in its entirety. And if that is even slightly true, then the next question is unavoidable, and it is the one that can change how you live. When you call something the present, are you naming a fact about the universe, or are you naming the quality of your attention? Have you ever wondered quietly, late at night, whether the future is already there, waiting, not as a destination we move toward, but as a place that somehow already exists? It is a thought that arrives like a strange breeze through an open window. If every moment is real, if the past has not truly vanished and the future has not truly been born, then what exactly are we doing when we live a day? Are we creating time, or simply traveling through a landscape that has always been complete? In physics, there is an idea sometimes called the block universe that treats time not as a river flowing from yesterday into tomorrow, but as a whole terrain where every event has a coordinate. In that picture, your childhood, your next conversation, your last breath, and a distant sunrise you have not yet seen are all part of the same vast structure. Not moving, not arriving. Simply there. At first, that can feel unsettling. The mind immediately protests. If the future already exists, does that mean your choices are only illusions? Does it mean your life is scripted, your path predetermined, your effort a performance for an audience that already knows the ending? It is an understandable fear, because we associate meaning with motion. We tell ourselves that the future is open because we feel ourselves reaching toward it. But feelings, however intimate, are not always reliable instruments for measuring reality. They are instruments for measuring us. Albert Einstein once wrote, in a letter mourning the death of his friend Michel Besso, that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. The line is famous because it sounds almost poetic, but it is also painfully precise. If the equations that describe the universe do not privilege now as a special moment, if they treat time as another dimension alongside space, then our sense of a moving present may be something the brain manufactures, rather than something the cosmos provides. And yet, even if it is manufactured, it is not meaningless. A candle flame is just chemistry, but it still warms your hands and lights your face. An illusion can be persistent because it is useful, because it keeps you alive, because it stitches experience into a story you can carry. The trouble is that our daily language makes time sound like a thing that flows past us, as if tomorrow pours into our lives the way rain fills a riverbed. But the physical world does not obviously show time behaving like a fluid. Clocks measure cycles, pendulums, vibrations, oscillations, repetitions of patterns. What changes is not time itself, but matter and energy evolving according to rules. We place those changes in an order and call that order the passage of time. Perhaps the sensation of time passing is less like being swept downstream and more like a spotlight moving across a stage, revealing one scene at a time. The play, in some deeper sense, may already be written into the architecture of reality, but the light still matters. Without the light, there is no experience of the play at all. Stephen Hawking captured another side of this mystery when he said, "The past, like the future, is indefinite and exists only as a spectrum of possibilities." That idea is often discussed in the context of quantum mechanics, where outcomes are not pinned down until interactions occur. And here the story becomes more subtle. The block universe picture feels rigid, like a completed sculpture. Quantum physics feels like a haze of probabilities, like a landscape that refuses to be fully drawn until you walk through it. Some researchers have explored whether the universe is block-like at the large scale, but indeterminate at the microscopic scale, and how those two faces might coexist. The important point for us, especially if we are speaking to the human heart rather than only to the blackboard, is that already exists does not automatically translate into already decided in the simple way we fear. Reality may be far stranger than either pure determinism or pure freedom, and our lives may unfold inside a tapestry where both structure and choice play their roles. To make this feel less abstract, consider a humble example that belongs to ordinary life. Imagine you are reading a novel you have never read before. The entire story is already printed. The final page exists while you are still on chapter 1, and yet, as you read, you still feel suspense. You still grieve, still hope, still lean forward. The existence of the last page does not erase the experience of turning each page. In fact, your experience depends on not knowing the ending. The future of the story exists, but your consciousness inhabits it sequentially. You are not cheated of meaning by the book's completeness. You are gifted meaning by your limited access to it. In that sense, the block is not a prison. It is the condition that makes narrative possible. Now shift the example from a book to a coastline seen from above. If you stand on the beach, the shoreline seems to arrive one wave at a time. Water reaches forward, retreats, reaches forward again. But if you rise in a plane, the coastline is simply there, an entire shape at once. The waves did not create the coastline. They reveal it locally, moment by moment, from a ground-level perspective. Something similar may be happening with our experience of time. From within the human viewpoint, life is a sequence. From a larger vantage, the sequence may be part of a whole. The ocean does not argue with the coastline. It embraces it, touches it, withdraws, returns. The motion is real as experience, even if the larger form is already complete. This is where the question of free will becomes delicate, and frankly, more interesting than the usual shouting match between everything is predetermined and everything is random. If the universe has a structure that includes your future, does it mean you have no agency? Not necessarily. Agency might be the way the structure expresses itself through you. Your choices may be real events inside the universe, not outside it. The decision you make tomorrow is not a ghostly freedom floating beyond physics. It is a physical process in your brain, shaped by memory, desire, fear, love, education, and the countless tiny influences that made you who you are. If tomorrow exists, it includes the fact that you deliberate, that you hesitate, that you choose. The choice is part of the future, not a contradiction to it. And there is another layer, quieter, almost meditative. Many of us assume time must pass because we feel ourselves aging. But what if aging is not proof that time moves? but proof that we move through states, through forms, through patterns. A photograph of you as a child still exists. It is not erased by your current age. In a sense, that child version of you is still there, in the same way a distant mountain is still there, even when you are not looking at it. The universe contains many versions of you across the years. The question is not whether those moments exist, but why you experience only one at a time. Why is consciousness pinned to a narrow now, like a needle tracing a groove on a vinyl record? This is where the conversation turns from physics to something almost sacred. Not sacred in the sense of dogma, but sacred in the sense of humility. We do not actually know what consciousness is. We do not know why subjective experience arises from matter. We can map brain activity, measure signals, trace networks, but the inner movie, the feeling of being you, remains profoundly mysterious. It may be that the passage we call time is inseparable from the way consciousness stitches moments into meaning. The universe may be a complete tapestry, but awareness may move along its threads. Not because the tapestry changes, but because awareness is a kind of reading, a kind of listening. And perhaps that is the most calming implication of all. If the future already exists, it does not have to mean that you are trapped. It can mean you are held within a larger order you do not need to force into existence. Held within a cosmos that does not depend on your anxiety to keep moving. The pressure we feel, this constant sense that we must outrun time, beat time, manage time, may be a misunderstanding. You cannot wrestle the shoreline into a different shape by yelling at the waves. You can only meet each wave as it arrives. So when you ask whether the future is already there, you are really asking two questions at once. You are asking a scientific question about the structure of space-time, and you are asking a human question about the meaning of choice, responsibility, and hope. Science can offer models. It can show us how relativity blurs the boundary between now and later, how different observers can disagree about simultaneity, how the universe does not hand us a universal present on a silver platter. But the second question, the one that keeps people awake or helps them finally sleep, belongs to the inner life. It asks, if my life is part of something larger, how do I live without fear? Maybe the answer is simpler than we think. Maybe you live by treating each choice as real, not because it invents the future from nothing, but because it is how the future becomes experienced. You speak gently because gentleness becomes part of the world's fabric. You learn because learning becomes part of the world's unfolding. You forgive because forgiveness alters the emotional geometry of a life. Even in a block universe, love is not decoration. Love is an event. And if the future is like a book already written, you might ask yourself something that is both scientific and deeply personal. What kind of reader will you be? Will you rush and skim, anxious to reach the ending? Or will you read slowly, noticing the small details that make the story worth living? Light on a kitchen floor, a voice you love, the quiet relief of a night that finally cools down? Because perhaps the deepest twist is this: even if the future exists, you still do not possess it. You only possess the page you are on. And that page, this moment, does not need to be conquered. It needs to be inhabited. So let the question linger, not as a threat, but as an invitation. If time does not truly pass the way we imagine, and if the future is not a place we manufacture but a landscape we enter, then what is the present? A moving blade, a doorway, a gentle beam of attention gliding across the vast architecture of reality. And if the universe has already written every chapter, what might it mean that you are the one turning the pages? Have you ever noticed how a single smell, a single song, A single photograph can crack open a sealed room inside you, and suddenly you are not remembering the past so much as standing inside it. When people ask whether memories truly disappear, I often think of the brain less like a filing cabinet and more like a night sky. Stars do not vanish just because we stop looking up. They dim behind city lights, behind clouds, behind the bright glare of whatever is urgent today. And yet the moment the air clears, the moment you step away from the noise, there they are again, ancient points of light, patiently waiting for your attention. In cognitive psychology, there's a line often repeated because it cuts cleanly through the romance and lands on something practical and true. Memory is the residue of thought. That is Daniel T. Willingham's way of saying that what you rehearse, what you revisit, what you emotionally circle in your mind, leaves a stronger trace. Not because time is kind, but because attention is selective. We don't store our lives like books on a shelf. We store them like paths in tall grass. The more often you walk them, the clearer they become. The paths you abandon don't necessarily vanish, they simply grow quiet. And that quiet is not emptiness. Quiet is not deletion. Quiet is the mind conserving energy, choosing what seems useful. The brain is an organ of survival before it is an organ of poetry. It prioritizes the immediate, the actionable, the thing that keeps you moving through the day. But even so, old moments can remain there in a form that is not always accessible on command. In neuroscience, we talk about retrieval cues, about context, about networks that reignite when the right spark arrives. You can go years without thinking of a childhood kitchen, and then one evening you smell onions browning in butter, and the whole kitchen returns, not as an idea but as a place. The light, the sound of a distant radio, the feeling of being small and safe. Was that memory gone 5 minutes earlier? Or was it simply waiting in the dark, like a constellation behind daylight? This is where the question becomes quietly profound. If the past is still there, does it still influence the present? The honest answer is yes, but not always in the way people imagine. The past does not usually push us like a visible hand. It shapes us more like gravity, invisible, constant, easy to ignore until you notice the curve of your own orbit. You may think you're reacting to a conversation happening now, but your body might be answering an older conversation it never finished. You may believe you're choosing a pattern freely, but your nervous system may be selecting what once felt safest. We are not just walking forward through time. We are carrying time in our posture, in our reflexes, in the little flinches and softenings that happen before language arrives. There is a second thought, equally unsettling and strangely comforting. Perhaps we don't move away from the past at all. Perhaps we only change perspective. Imagine standing in a vast library where every moment of your life is a book already placed on a shelf. You walk down the aisles and pick up a volume. When you open it, you are not dragging the past into the present, you are placing your awareness on a particular page. Close the book, and you are back in the aisle. Open it again, and the scene returns. In physics, there are ideas that tempt us toward a similar metaphor. The sense that time may be less like a river and more like a landscape. Even if you don't accept that literally, the psychological experience is undeniable. A memory, when recalled vividly, does not feel like a dead record. It feels alive. It feels present. It can change your heartbeat and your breathing as if the event is happening again. In that sense, remembering is not a simple replay, it is a re-entry. And here we arrive at a line from Nobel laureate Gerald Edelman that is both scientific and strangely poetic. Every act of memory is to some degree an act of imagination. That one sentence, protects us from two extremes. It reminds us, first, that memory is not a perfect archive. When you remember, you reconstruct. You assemble fragments. You fill gaps. You blend what happened with what you believed, what you feared, what you later learned, and what you now need the story to mean. But it also reminds us of something gentler. The past is not locked. The way it lives inside you can change. The same event can become a wound, a lesson, a warning, a doorway, depending on how you hold it. Let me give you two simple examples, because these ideas can sound abstract until they touch ordinary life. First, think of the forgotten friend. Perhaps you haven't spoken in years. Their name rarely enters your mind. You might even say you've moved on. Then one day you pass a place you used to visit together, a diner, a street corner, a lake. Suddenly the friend returns with astonishing clarity. You remember how they laughed, the exact rhythm of it. You remember a particular argument, the way you swallowed words you should have said. And for a few minutes, you are not in today's world at all. You are there. Now notice what happens next. Your present mood changes. Your body changes. Maybe you feel warmth and gratitude. Maybe you feel regret. Maybe you feel a quiet ache that has nothing to do with the traffic in front of you. That is influence. The past has not merely appeared, it has reached into your current moment and adjusted the meaning of your day. Second, consider the case of a childhood fear that seems irrational in adulthood. A grown person might know there is nothing to fear in a harmless situation, and yet their chest tightens, their palms sweat, their voice becomes smaller. If you ask them why, they may not have an answer. The memory that formed the fear is not accessible as a clear story. But the body remembers patterns even when the mind cannot name the origin. Later, perhaps in a quiet conversation, a detail emerges. A teacher's tone, a slammed door, a humiliating moment in front of classmates. Suddenly the fear makes sense. Did that memory disappear for decades? Or was it quietly shaping behavior from beneath awareness, like a hidden moon pulling on the tides? When we speak of the past being there, we should be careful not to turn it into a mystical claim. This is not about ghosts trapped in the brain. It is about networks, associations, emotional tags, and the way experience becomes encoded. Yet when you sit with it long enough, the scientific explanation does not remove the wonder. If anything, it deepens it, because it suggests that you are not a single point moving cleanly forward. You are a layered being. Many versions of you are still present within you, some bright, some dim, some waiting for the right key. And that brings us to the final, most intimate question. If you remember a moment vividly, is it alive again right now? In a strict sense, the original event is not repeating in the external world. But in the only world you ever directly experience, the world of perception, it is returning as a real internal event. The brain regions that process emotion, sensation, and meaning can light up in patterns that echo the original experience. That is why a memory can comfort you like a blanket or haunt you like a storm cloud. You are not lying to yourself. You are visiting a place in your own time map. So perhaps the real educational value here is not to become obsessed with whether memories exist like objects. The deeper value is to understand attention. What we repeatedly attend to becomes stronger. What we avoid becomes strange and powerful in its silence. What we reframe can loosen its grip. What we honor gently can become wisdom instead of weight. In that sense, the past is not a chain, it is a teacher. But only if we learn how to meet it without being swallowed by it. And if we zoom out, just for a breath, into the cosmic perspective, the metaphor becomes almost unavoidable. Starlight takes time to reach us. Some stars we see are already gone, and yet their light is arriving now, perfectly real to our eyes. The past, in the universe, is never completely past. It travels, it lingers, it arrives late, and maybe something similar is happening inside us. Maybe the moments we call gone are simply light that hasn't reached the surface yet, which leaves a quiet question hanging in the air, like a final note that refuses to fade. If the past can return with such force, if it can shape the present without announcing itself, then what else inside you is still there, patiently waiting for you to notice? Have you ever noticed that the moment your mind becomes quiet, time seems to soften, slow, and loosen its grip, as if it were never a hard, ticking machine at all? Most of us live as if time is a river that drags us forward. But in the simplest, most intimate experiments of everyday life, that river behaves strangely. When the mind is crowded, 2 minutes feel sharp and heavy. When the mind is spacious, the same minutes feel wide, almost weightless. And that is where your questions land with a gentle force, not as a puzzle for physicists alone, but as a doorway into the human experience. In our most peaceful moments, do we even think about time, or do we forget it entirely? There's a haunting line often attributed to Albert Einstein, spoken not as poetry, but as a sober reflection on reality. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Whether we take that as literal physics or as philosophical provocation, it harmonizes with what we discover in silence. The passage of time may be less like an external conveyor belt and more like an internal story we continuously narrate. The mind, when busy, becomes a clockmaker, building a sense of before and after out of thought, worry, memory, anticipation. The mind, when still, stops carving the world into slices. And suddenly, time does not disappear, but it becomes irrelevant, like a calendar left behind on a shore while you float in open water. Think of the last time you were waiting for something you could not control: a delayed flight, a medical test result, a phone call that mattered too much. Nothing in the world's machinery truly changed in those minutes. Yet each minute felt swollen, stretched, almost theatrical in its slowness. Your body was in one place, but your mind was constantly stepping forward and backward, rehearsing what might happen, regretting what already happened, measuring each breath against a future you couldn't reach yet. Now compare that to a different scene. You're doing something simple and absorbing, cooking slowly, tending a garden, listening to rain at night, watching a child draw with total devotion to the line forming under the pencil. In those moments, time does something almost paradoxical. It can feel slow while you're inside it, and then, when you look back, it feels as if it vanished. This is not a contradiction, it's a clue. It suggests that our sense of time is braided together with attention. When attention is fragmented, time feels like a cage with bars you can count. When attention becomes whole, time feels like air, present but not imprisoning. This is why the question, "Does time only exist when there is thought?" is not naive at all. It is deeply practical and quietly radical. Because even if the universe has its clocks, its orbits, its decays and durations, the time you suffer and the time you cherish is made, in large part, inside the theater of consciousness. Here is another voice that echoes through centuries: St. Augustine, not a scientist, but an observer of the inner cosmos. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. The moment we try to seize time with the mind, it becomes slippery, and we realize we were not holding a thing at all, but a relationship. Time, in lived experience, is not simply a number, it is meaning arranged in sequence. It is the mind placing labels on the stream of sensation. This was, this is, this might be. And that labeling is thought. Without that labeling, what remains is raw presence. A direct contact with what is happening, now. This is why, in your most peaceful moments, you don't think about time. Not because time has stopped, but because the mind has stopped measuring itself against an imagined timeline. Peace is not the absence of events. It is the absence of internal argument with events. In meditation, for example, nothing mystical needs to happen for time to change its face. You sit, you breathe, you notice the mind reaching for stories, and you let those stories pass like clouds. At first, the mind insists on counting. How long has it been? How much longer? Am I doing it right? But with patience, something shifts. The counting becomes quieter. The inner narrator becomes softer. And then, for brief windows, the sensation of time passing loses its authority. The clock does not break, but it fades into the background like a distant lighthouse when you are no longer lost at sea. And here is the subtle, profound edge of your final question. If consciousness pauses in a still moment, does time still have meaning? We have to be careful with words here. In physics, time can be treated as a coordinate, a dimension in the mathematics of events. But meaning is not a coordinate. It is something mind brings to experience. Meaning requires a witness, a context, a frame. Without consciousness, the universe may still happen, but the happening is not meaningful in the way we understand meaning. A sunrise without eyes is still a sunrise, but it is not beautiful until beauty is recognized. A melody in an empty room is still vibration, but it is not music until it is heard. In the same way, time without awareness may still be describable, but it may not be time as you and I actually live it. What we call the passage of time is not merely change. It is change interpreted, change remembered, change anticipated. It is the mind stitching moments into a narrative thread and calling that thread a life. When the stitching stops, even for a breath, the thread doesn't vanish, but it is no longer felt as tight around the heart. This is where the cosmos enters the room, not as distant spectacle, but as intimacy. We tend to imagine the universe as a grand clock, galaxies turning like gears, planets tracing precise ellipses, stars aging on schedules of billions of years. But even that image may be, at least partly, a human metaphor, a way for the mind to translate vastness into something familiar. Out there, in the deep dark between galaxies, there is no anxious creature counting minutes. There is no calendar grieving what has passed. There is only processes unfolding, fields shifting, light traveling, matter dancing with gravity. The passage that troubles us is the one we feel because we remember. Memory is a gift, but it is also the furnace where time is forged. The moment you remember, you create a then. The moment you anticipate, you create a not yet. And between then and not yet, the mind constructs a narrow bridge called now and rushes across it, rarely noticing the view. So perhaps the educational value hidden in your questions is this. If you want a different relationship with time, you don't need to control time. You need to understand attention. Two people can live the same hour and inhabit completely different universes. One person can spend 60 minutes trapped in mental noise, gnawed by regret and worry, feeling as if the hour were a punishment. Another person can spend 60 minutes in simple presence, washing dishes slowly, listening to a loved one speak, watching clouds drift, and feel as if the hour were a small eternity of calm. The clock on the wall will report the same measurement, but the inner sky is different. And that difference is not abstract. It changes your nervous system, your health, your sense of meaning. It changes the way you meet aging, the way you meet loss, the way you meet uncertainty. It reminds you that time, as suffering, is often the mind fighting what is, and time, as peace, is often the mind resting inside what is. If the future already exists and the passage of time does not, that might sound like a cold, deterministic idea, but in the language of lived experience it can become strangely comforting. It suggests that the frantic chase is optional. It suggests that your life is not only a line rushing forward, but also a vast landscape of moments, and you are learning how to stand in one of them with clarity. So I'll leave you with a gentle thought to carry into the next part of our journey. What if the deepest time travel available to us is not moving into tomorrow or returning to yesterday, but arriving more fully into this breath, this heartbeat, this quiet space where the mind stops counting and starts listening? In the next segment, we'll begin exactly there, at the most human entry point into this mystery, when time does not change, only our perception does. Have you ever wondered, not as a philosopher in a library, but as an ordinary human in an ordinary afternoon, whether you are actually traveling through time, or whether you are simply waking up to one moment after another, like a lantern drifting through a dark, silent hall? We speak about time as if it were a river carrying us downstream, but notice how strange that metaphor becomes the moment you sit still. The room does not move. The air does not announce its passage. And yet inside you, something shifts, something counts, something anticipates. So here is the curious question that opens the door. If time is real in the way we assume, why does it sometimes feel like a sprint and other times like a long, patient vigil? In physics, there is an idea that can feel both unsettling and strangely comforting. It is the notion that the universe may not be a story that is continuously written in front of us, but a vast structure in which every page already exists. Some call it the block universe, a way of picturing space and time as a single tapestry rather than a marching line. In that view, yesterday is not gone in the way a burned paper is gone. Tomorrow is not missing in the way an unopened letter is missing. They are simply different regions of the same cosmic landscape. Albert Einstein, in a message of consolation written near the end of his life, hinted at this perspective when he said that the separation between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. That is not a command to stop caring about your life or your choices. It is an invitation to question what you mean when you say, time is passing. And yet, if the future already exists in some sense, where are you inside that vast structure? Are you pinned to a single slice called now, helplessly watching reality unfold? Or are you something more like a reader whose attention moves through a book that is already printed, page by page, sentence by sentence, line by line? This is where the human experience becomes essential, because regardless of what the equations suggest, we do not live as if we are statues embedded in four-dimensional stone. We feel movement. We feel arrival. We feel loss. We feel waiting. We feel the soft ache of nostalgia and the sharp edge of urgency. Something in us insists that time is not an abstract coordinate, but a living current. What if that insistence is not proof that time flows, but proof that consciousness edits the world into a sequence? The mind does something remarkable. It stitches together fragments of sensation into a coherent film. It selects a now from a flood of information, and it frames it as the present. It retains a trail behind it and calls that trail memory. It imagines what might come next and calls that future. The philosopher and psychologist William James described the specious present, the idea that the present moment is not a razor-thin knife edge, but a short duration our minds hold together as a single felt experience. In other words, even your now may already be a crafted artifact, shaped by attention, by expectation, by the way your nervous system integrates signals. Here is the gentle pivot that turns this from a cold concept into something you can actually feel. Think about a moment when you were completely absorbed. Perhaps you were listening to music late at night, the room dim, the world quiet, and the song seemed to carry you without effort. When the music ended, you looked at the clock and felt surprised by how much time had passed. Then compare that with a time you were waiting for a call, a diagnosis, a flight delay, a loved one to return. Suddenly, minutes became heavy. Seconds felt like droplets falling from a stubborn faucet. Did time itself change speed, like a machine shifting gears? Or did your awareness change how it sampled reality? This brings us to an image that makes the idea easier to hold. Imagine you are standing on a high ridge at night, overlooking a city. The city is spread out beneath you, glowing with countless lights. In that city, many lives are happening at once. Someone is laughing in a kitchen. Someone is driving through rain. Someone is whispering, "I love you," for the last time before sleep. From your vantage point, the entire city exists simultaneously, but you can only pay attention to one window at a time. Your attention moves, not the city. Your focus travels, not the streets. If the universe is something like that, then time might be the motion of attention through a reality that is already there, an inner spotlight sliding across a landscape that does not need to flow to be real. A second example, even closer to home. Think of a flipbook animation, the kind made of many drawings on small pages. All the pages exist at once. The story is already complete. But the motion appears only when you flip through it in sequence. The movement is not inside the ink. It emerges from the way you reveal the pages. In this analogy, your consciousness is the hand turning pages. Your brain is the mechanism that keeps the sequence coherent, and your sense of time is the moving picture that results. The future exists as pages not yet turned, but your experience of it feels open, uncertain, alive, because you have not arrived there with your attention. Now, if that is true, what is actually changing? Is the world changing, or is your relationship to it changing? This question is not merely philosophical. It reaches into how you handle regret, how you handle fear, how you handle the silent pressure of the ticking clock. Because if the passage of time is not a literal river, then perhaps many of our anxieties are aimed at a metaphor. We fear we are being swept away. We fear we are running out. We fear we are late. But what if you are not being dragged through reality like a leaf in a current? What if you are a perceiver moving through a structure? And what matters most is the quality of your attention, the clarity of your seeing, the tenderness of your choosing. Of course, none of this denies that physical processes change. Bodies age, stars burn fuel, cups fall and shatter, entropy increases. The universe has a direction of change that physicists call the arrow of time, tied to the growth of disorder. But notice what that means. The arrow of time is not necessarily the same thing as the feeling of time flowing. One is a statistical tendency in thermodynamics. The other is a lived experience inside the mind. The two are related, but they are not identical. And in that gap between them, some of the deepest questions lie. The cosmologist Sean Carroll has put it plainly in a way that is both sober and illuminating. The reason we remember the past and not the future is not because time moves that way, but because the past is the direction in which entropy was lower, allowing records to form. That single insight is like a quiet lantern in a foggy forest. It suggests that memory is not a mystical thread reaching backward, but a physical imprint made possible by the universe's conditions. Yet even if our memories are physical records, the meaning we feel in them, the sweetness, the grief, the longing comes from consciousness, interpreting those records and building a narrative called me. And this is where the tone becomes almost meditative, because once you see that your sense of time might be partly constructed, you can begin to notice how much agency you have over your experience. Not over the universe's equations, but over your attention. When you are anxious, the mind often throws itself into imagined futures, rehearsing disasters, scanning shadows. The future becomes a loud room filled with echoes. When you are regretful, the mind loops the past, trying to rewrite it, trying to bargain with what cannot be undone. But when you return to the simple act of noticing breath, sound, light, the weight of your body, you step into a quieter truth. Whatever the structure of time is, your experience is happening only as awareness touches this moment. So perhaps the most educational value in this idea is not in proving a model right or wrong, but in refining our relationship with the mystery. If you are moving through time, you might live in a constant chase, always behind, always rushing towards something that never arrives. But if you are recognizing moments, encountering them one by one, then your life can become less like a race and more like a pilgrimage. The same day can feel completely different, depending on how you inhabit it. The same hour can be either a prison or a sanctuary. And there is one more subtle implication, one that brings a kind of humility. If every moment exists in some deep sense, then the universe is not only a place of events, but a library of experiences. Your childhood laughter is not merely a vanished sound. It is a coordinate in the vast architecture of being. Your hardest night is not merely a scar. It is a chamber that exists, and you have already survived it. Your future joys, if they exist, are not hopes floating in emptiness, but rooms you have not yet entered. That is not certainty. It is possibility. But it is a possibility that can soften the grip of fear. So let the question return, the way a refrain returns in a slow piece of music. Are you traveling through time, or are you becoming aware of moments? If all moments exist, where are you among them? Is time a road you move along, or a map you learn to read? And if the deepest change is not in the universe but in the observer, then what happens when you change the way you look? Stay with me, because in the next part we're going to move even closer to the intimate center of this mystery. Why now feels so real, why it feels like a doorway sliding forward, and how the mind might be quietly manufacturing the sensation of passage moment by moment, like a gentle projector casting motion onto a still screen. Have you ever wondered what would happen to your fear if you truly believe the future already exists? That single question feels like standing at the edge of a vast, quiet ocean at night. The waves are real, the wind is real, and yet the horizon does not rush toward you. It simply waits. And when we talk about a universe in which the future might already be there, we're not necessarily claiming that destiny is carved into stone. We're exploring a possibility that many physicists and philosophers circle around from different angles. A possibility that can change the way you hold your own life in your hands. Because if the future exists in some sense, then perhaps the frantic sprint we call worry is not a requirement of reality, but a habit of the mind. The mind, after all, is a storyteller. It loves to narrate a chase. It loves to turn tomorrow into a cliff edge and push you toward it, breathless. Albert Einstein once offered a line that has comforted and unsettled generations. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Not everyone agrees with the implications, but the emotional impact is undeniable. If the boundary lines are less solid than we imagine, then maybe the way we panic about what is coming is like shouting at a sunrise to hurry up. The sun does not speed up. It does not negotiate. It rises according to a deeper order. And perhaps, in a similar way, your life unfolds according to a structure you cannot fully see from inside the moment you are living. This is where people often tense up. If the future already exists, does that mean your choices are meaningless, your efforts are theater, your love and pain already scripted? Not necessarily. Think of a mountain range. From one valley, you only see one ridge. Walk to another valley and a different ridge appears. The mountains did not rearrange themselves. Your perspective did. Many modern interpretations of time, especially those that treat spacetime as a four-dimensional whole, don't erase choice so much as they relocate it. Your decisions are still real events. Your kindness still alters what happens next. Your courage still changes the shape of your day. It's just that, in this picture, the next might not be something the universe is generating on the fly, but something we encounter, step by step, like a traveler moving through terrain that already exists. And if that's true, even as a metaphor, then a practical question rises like a warm light in the chest. If the future already exists, do you still need to worry so much? Worry is often a form of time travel performed by the nervous system. It drags you into imagined scenes that haven't occurred, then asks your body to react as if they are already here. Your shoulders tighten. Your breath shortens. Your heart becomes a metronome for a song that hasn't started playing. But if the future is there, in some deeper sense, then worry becomes a strange ritual, like trying to push a river downstream by shouting at it. The river has its own gravity. Your shouting exhausts you, not the water. Here's a simple example you can feel in your bones. Imagine you're waiting for a medical test result. 2 days can feel like 2 years. Your mind builds a corridor of doors, and behind each door is a catastrophe. You open them all, one by one, in your imagination. You suffer 50 times before anything real happens. Then the phone rings, and the reality, good or bad, arrives as a single moment you can actually meet. This is not to dismiss real hardship. It's to notice the difference between what is happening and what the mind rehearses. If time does not flow the way we instinctively feel, then your rehearsal is not a preview of reality. It's a storm your mind creates inside a sealed room. A second example is gentler. Think about a child on a long car ride asking, "Are we there yet?" Every minute stretches. The destination feels like a myth. But for the adult behind the wheel, the route is known. The map is clear. The arrival is not a question, only a matter of driving. The child's impatience does not change the distance. It changes only the experience of the distance. And if you've ever been that child, you already understand something profound. Suffering often comes not from the length of the journey, but from the insistence that the journey should be shorter. So what happens if we take the next question seriously? If time does not pass, does each moment become more precious? Many people assume the opposite. If the future is already there, then perhaps the present is less meaningful, just a single frame in a finished film. But look closer. If the present is not being swallowed by a rushing river called time, then it is not disposable. It is not a scrap that vanishes the instant it arrives. It becomes, in a strange way, eternal in its own place. Like a star that burned out long ago but still reaches you with its light. Each moment is part of the universe's permanent archive. Not permanent in your memory, but permanent in the fabric of what has happened. The physicist Carlo Rovelli, who writes beautifully about the nature of time, once said, "Time is not what we think it is." That sentence can sound cold until you sit with it. Because if time is not what we think, then our habit of treating moments as cheap, scrolling past them, rushing through them, postponing joy, postponing rest, begins to look like a tragic misunderstanding. We throw away the only place we ever truly live. We exchange the texture of now for a fantasy of later. And this is where the idea of living slowly can be reimagined. Maybe living slowly is not about doing fewer things. Maybe it's about realizing you are always exactly where you are. Always. The mind is the part that runs. The body remains here. The breath remains here. The room remains here. The planet remains here, turning in silence under the same ancient sky. When people speak of mindfulness, they often reduce it to a technique. But at its heart, it's a recognition. You cannot leave the present. You can only stop noticing it. If you stand outside on a clear night and look up, you are already practicing this without knowing. The stars are teaching you. The light you see is old. Some of it traveled for thousands of years, some for millions, some for billions. Yet it arrives as a single quiet truth in your eyes. The cosmos does not hurry its messages. It does not apologize for delay. And when you let that sink in, your own urgency begins to soften. You start to sense that the universe is not a machine chasing a finish line. It is an immense, patient geometry, a cathedral of events, all held in place, whether or not your mind can bear to imagine it. And then we reach the final question, the most intimate one. If everything is already there, how do you want to feel this moment? This is where education becomes personal. Because even if the physics is debated, even if the philosophers argue, the lived truth remains. Your experience of time is deeply shaped by attention. If you spend your attention only on what you fear, time becomes a weapon. If you spend your attention on what is real, time becomes a home. You do not need to deny the future. You do not need to pretend nothing matters. You simply recognize that the only doorway you ever pass through is this one, right now. Try a small experiment. The next time you drink water, don't drink it like a task. Drink it like a traveler who has crossed a desert. Feel the coolness. Hear the swallow. Sense the gratitude of cells receiving what they need. In that tiny act, the moment expands. Not because time changed, but because you arrived. Or the next time you speak to someone you love, listen as if your words are being etched into stone, because in a way, they are. What you say becomes part of the unchangeable structure of what happened. That's not pressure. That's beauty. It makes tenderness feel weighty in the best possible way. If the future already exists, then your worry cannot prevent it, and your panic cannot control it. But your presence can transform how you meet it. And if time does not pass, then the moment you are living is not a disposable cup you crush and throw away. It is a chamber in the great architecture of your life. You can stand in it distracted, or you can stand in it awake. So perhaps the real invitation here is not to solve time like a puzzle, but to relate to it differently, to loosen the grip of the mind that always runs ahead, to stop treating tomorrow like a predator, to let the present be what it already is, the only place you can love from, the only place you can learn from, the only place you can breathe from. And if history, physics, and contemplation are pointing toward anything at all, it may be this quiet, stubborn truth. The universe does not demand your hurry. It asks for your attention. And now, as we move forward, keep that question close, like a warm stone in your palm. If everything is already there, what would it mean to meet this moment without rushing past it? As we come to the end of this journey, what remains is not a final answer about time or the future, but a gentler understanding of how we move within our own lives. Whether the future already exists or unfolds moment by moment, whether time flows or merely appears to, one truth quietly reveals itself again and again. Our experience is shaped less by the structure of the universe and more by the quality of our attention. When we rush, time feels like an enemy. When we arrive fully, it feels like a companion. Perhaps the deepest lesson here is not about physics or philosophy, but about presence. Every moment you inhabit is not a stepping stone to somewhere else. It is a complete place in itself, worthy of care, curiosity, and respect. If this reflection has offered you even a small pause, a breath, or a shift in perspective, then it has already done its work. Thank you for spending this time with me, for lending your attention, and for allowing these ideas to unfold slowly rather than demanding quick conclusions. If you feel moved, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Do you feel time passing, or do you feel yourself passing through moments? Your reflections add depth to this shared exploration. Until next time, stay curious, stay gentle with yourself, and remember you are always exactly where you need to be.